Hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff and I'm joined today by Jared Nelson and friend of the show, Steve Tipton. We're sad not to have Scott with us, but Providence dictated that he be absent, and so we asked Steve at the last minute, I should mention, to jump in, and we're very grateful he's here. Steve, how you doing, man? It's good to see you.
Good to see you guys. I'm a sorry stand-in for Scott Edberg, but I'll do my best.
Well, today the three of us are going to dive into chapter 21 of the BCO, which starts to outline, or rather doesn't start, it sort of does it all, the essential guidelines for ordination and installation of ministers. It emphasizes, as we'll see, the authority and the responsibility of the presbytery in the whole process of call and examination and ordination of the teaching elder. Presbyteries function as gatekeepers is the common phrase that you hear a lot, especially when you're talking about credentials committees, but there's also a lot of shepherding work that goes into this, as is evident when we work through this chapter. Presbyteries have to evaluate candidates, their calls, their theological soundness, their personal character. There's a lot involved in this endeavor, and so there's a lot of instruction here for us. The process can feel sort of overly administrative and technical, but it's good for us to remember as we work into this chapter that this is all a recognition of Christ as King over the church. He's the one who calls and equips ministers. He's the one who's given them to the church for our edification, and so we're grateful to him, and we try to do this as best we can, and so that's one reason we have such a robust chapter on this topic. We're just going to jump right into it in 21, section 1, and I'm going to let these guys kind of comment after we read, and we'll see where we can go. 21:1 begins this way: No minister, licentiate, or candidate shall receive a call from a church but by the permission of his presbytery. When a call has been presented to the presbytery, if found in order, and the presbytery deems it for the good of the church, they shall place it in the hands of the person to whom it is addressed. Ordinarily, a candidate or licentiate may not be granted permission by the presbytery to move onto the field to which he's been called prior to his examination for licensure or ordination. Likewise, an ordained minister from another PCA presbytery or another denomination ordinarily shall not move onto the field to which he's been called until examined and received by presbytery. It's sad that Scott's not here because one of his favorite words occurs multiple times in this paragraph. But one of you guys should talk for a second because I've been rambling now for a long time. How does this paragraph get us going into 21? What's it trying to set up for us?
Well, it gives real authority to the presbytery in the question of a call. It's not a rubber stamp. It's not just a formality. There's real work that has to go into seeing if the person is qualified, if the call is in order, if all of the details are right, and even gives this warning that it shouldn't be presumed that it's just going to go fine and to move onto the field, which I take to be kind of two things at once. Beginning the work, if you were called to be the senior, that you're not just going there being the senior for a while and then saying, oh yeah, presbytery, he's been doing this for a while, why don't you formalize it? But it also may be, don't buy a house there, have a mortgage payment that's going to be starting there before you get the presbytery to approve. It's presumptuous and not wise, and so the BCO is giving you a little bit of instruction that's there. So broadly, that's what we see going on in 21:1.
Well, and one of the things that this is setting up is sort of there are three parties. It's a three-party system, but you have the church, the presbytery, and then the individual, the man. And on the one hand, as we'll kind of get into some other pieces later, I mean, all three of those have to consent to the call, and it's all three are in one sense of equal importance, right? I mean, no presbytery can force a pastor on a church without their consent. A church and a presbytery cannot conspire against a minister to force him to go into a call against his will. But also the church and the man, even if they be entirely desirous that call move forward, the presbytery still has the ultimate responsibility to ordain or install, depending upon this, and or install, I guess, depending on the circumstances. And so I think it's important, and this is not a rubber stamp. And especially the moving onto the field. Jared and I were in a situation together at a presbytery where somebody I don't think he'd actually moved physically, but I think he'd sold his house and purchased property, and his exam, we'll just say, didn't go well. And, I was very proud of our presbytery, because a lot of times that pressure of, well, he's already done this or that can weigh into that decision. It did not move Jared one iota. So I think it's a good thing. I also thought it was interesting. I'm going to be making a lot of comments from Ramsey today, because I thought some of his comments on this chapter, it's a different chapter in his book, but on the relevant sections were pretty interesting. And one of those is that the responsibility of the presbytery is for the good of the church. That it is, and I think you could take that one of two ways. The particular church, but also for the church broadly. And I think both of those things are part of that decision that the presbytery has to make. And presbyteries ought to be considering their knowledge and experience of the congregation, maybe not the man, they may not know him from Adam, but certainly the congregation, and then based upon that whole process, being willing to say, and hopefully the church being willing to receive, we really don't think this guy's a good fit for you for a number of reasons. And again, I've had enough experiences where men have said, maybe to themselves or to one another, I really don't think this guy's a good fit, but he has a call, and et cetera, et cetera. And then it turns out not to have been a good fit. And you step back, it's like, well, I wish I would have said something. But, all the problems inherent in that, I get that. But I think it's an important piece. The other thing I thought was interesting was Ramsey mentioned, I guess, under their polity, old PCOS, that its understanding is that the call isn't even given to the minister until the presbytery approves it. So the man would not even know that a call is being offered until it's very weird. Because it's almost like, how do you examine a guy in order to know to give him a call? It was interesting. But we place the call in his hand as you've already seen it, you've already agreed to it, and we're handing it over.
Hey, we'd like to examine you, but we're not going to tell you why. Just don't ask any questions. Do you guys
answer
have
lots of them?
Yeah, for real. Do y'all have provisions for any of your committees and your presbyteries about commission powers to grant a man permission to move before the presbytery meeting?
We do. I'm fairly certain we do.
In our case, so our credentials committee, if we have a man transferring his membership and he's a member of the PCA already, he's a teaching elder in another presbytery, we're allowed to give him permission to move, but we try not to do that because it's always got the language of pending presbytery approval. And Steve, you gave the example, and we've had one here where somebody moves even before they've been given permission, and then they don't do well on their exam, much less somebody who's been given permission by the committee but then doesn't do well on the floor. It can be a complicated situation. You really have to be careful because, Jared, you referenced it, like you're uprooting your whole family, you're moving, there's financial things involved.
Well, and if there's a concern about, hey, presbytery is not going to happen in another 3 or 4 months, there's provision to call a meeting and to have it happen sooner.
Right. Yeah.
And so if that's really a problem, there's ways to alleviate that doesn't possibly have you have to try to get out of a mortgage and lose a bunch of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that the great word, ordinarily. Gotta love
Well,
it.
and it's interesting. I mean, I was going to make this point later, but I think it actually has more bearing here. So in the congregational vow section during the actual ordination/installation, another thing Ramsey says, this is the time where a congregation can decide that it changes its mind and not take those vows, or of a large portion refuse. So, under his view, like, you shouldn't even move onto the field until after you've been installed, man. the ink is dry before you move on. So, different worlds, but.
Man, it makes you wonder what kind of situations he experienced or observed, where churches backed out or presbyteries failed to approve or something. It's just, what a world. Well, let's keep going then. 21:2. When an intern has completed his internship to the satisfaction of the presbytery and has accepted a call, the presbytery shall take immediate steps for his ordination. A pretty basic instruction, but I'm sure there's some more particular thought behind this. Why is it important for the presbytery, once approving the call and the man being ready, why is it important for them to take immediate steps for his ordination?
Yeah, I think just the delay, I think broadly speaking, the BCO, even though it makes provisions for things like assistant pastors and associate pastors, that a lot of this language is tied to, a church with what we call a solo pastor, or even a senior pastor, but where, although not a lot of senior pastors have just finished their internship and need to be ordained. But either way, I think the idea is that there is a church that needs the regular preaching of the gospel, which a licentiate can do, but also the administration of sacraments. And so if there is a delay, then that's unduly burdening the church. And so I've never been in I've been in lots of situations in presbyteries where important matters are pushed to another presbytery meeting for good reason. I've never seen an ordination exam pushed away because, hey, we really have this budget we've got to approve, or, well, maybe that's a bad example, but there's a new program for Christian education that we really need to discuss and get on the table. No, this is really important. It needs to be done quickly and immediately. And obviously immediately is in the context of a presbytery. This doesn't mean called meeting tomorrow. This means in the regular course of their meetings, there ought to be the immediate step is you proceed to ordination.
Yeah, there needs to be some sense of urgency of high on the docket, but also I know there are certain states, and I think even the president has something they can do that's a pocket veto, where you just don't do anything and it basically vetoes it and says no. That's not an option for a presbytery. You can't say, like, we don't want to approve this guy, so we'll just table it indefinitely. No, like, you need to act on it. Yes or no. Give your answer.
It pairs really well with the previous chapter from 20, section 2, where it starts off saying every church should be under the pastoral oversight of a minister, and when a church has no pastor, it should seek to secure one without delay. And so it wouldn't make any sense for their churches to be instructed to secure a pastor quickly and then for the presbytery to drag their feet. Also, it takes a long time to do this. I mean, we have to have exams, to our committee 4 weeks before presbytery so that we can have our recommendations to presbytery and examinations orally to the presbytery before, 3 weeks before, and the guy's got a plan to come. I mean, there's a lot involved, not to mention all the studying and the written exams that usually go along with this. So immediate steps may start soon, but they don't often finish so quickly. 23, excuse me. I was looking at chapter 20. 21-3, no presbytery shall ordain any intern to the office of minister of the word with reference to his laboring within the bounds of another presbytery, but shall furnish him with the necessary testimonials and require him to repair to the presbytery within whose bounds he expects to labor, that he may submit himself to its authority according to the constitution of the church. So it's not an uncommon situation, right, for a man to be a candidate and then a subsequent intern, maybe even licentiate in one presbytery while he's going through his schooling, but then to get a call from a different presbytery. And the presbytery in which he's been can't ordain him to the work he's being called to, and so there has to be some movement happening. You guys may have some comments on this. It's pretty straightforward, but there's some significance in here.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that a presbytery is, for an unordained man, you have to have a call. You have to be ordained to a call. The call is in the bounds of another presbytery. It is not, well, we'll ordain him to that call, because how can they put the call into his... I mean, you end up with an uncalled minister, basically, otherwise. So, I mean, it seems like a pretty like a lot of warning signs you see at restaurants and on products. Clearly somebody tried this once before and someone said, no, we're not doing that. So, but yeah, seems pretty simple.
That's good. Oh, Jared's giving me the nod. All right. 21-4 is one of our, it's probably the longest in this chapter. And I'm going to handle it in, let's see, I was going to give y'all some instructions. We're going to take A and B. Is that how it's listed in the actual book? I've got it numbered in front of me, but A and B, and then we'll do C and D, and then we'll take E through the end. So we'll kind of talk about it in 3 parts. So settle in, everybody. Listeners, this is what you're here for, the BCO audiobook. An intern applying for ordination shall be required to present a diploma of bachelor or master from some approved college or university, and also a diploma of bachelor or master from some approved theological seminary, or authentic testimonials of having completed a regular course of theological studies, or a certificate of completion of an endorsement from a theological study program as approved by the General Assembly and one of the presbyteries of the PCA. No presbytery shall omit any of these educational requirements except in extraordinary cases, and then only with a 3/4 approval of the presbytery. Whenever a presbytery shall omit any of these educational requirements, it shall always make a record of the reasons for such omission and the parts omitted. The intern shall also present satisfactory testimonials as to the completion and approval of his internship and the practice of the ministry. B. Every candidate for ordination shall ordinarily have met the requirements of the Assembly's approved curriculum. Ordinarily, the intern shall have been examined in most of the following trials when he was licensed. If the presbytery previously approved all parts of the licensure examination, it need not re-examine the intern in those areas at this time. If there were areas of weakness, which the presbytery noted, or if any member of the presbytery desires to do so, the intern may be examined on particular points again. Additionally, the intern shall be examined on any parts required for ordination which were not covered in his examination for licensure. In all cases, he should be asked to indicate whether he has changed his previous views concerning any points in the Confession of Faith, Catechisms, and Book of Church Order of the PCA. So laying out educational requirements and sort of covering what can move with a man as he moves toward ordination from his previous exams for licensure and otherwise. Maybe just start with A. There's some extraordinary circumstances, but it lays out the basics, which is a bachelor's and a master's from a university and a theological institution. Maybe you guys want to talk about the exceptions here, the extraordinary cases that can be implemented. If you've seen them implemented before. I mean, some of us have probably seen a few of these in different cases.
Well, I mean, I actually just want to make a quick comment just even about like bachelor and master's degrees, which are not, I mean, you're not going to find that in scripture, which seminary did Paul go to or whatever else. But I do think it's part of that, sort of common to human institutions language that we see in the Westminster Confession when it comes to polity things. And, obviously times are changing and, questions about, the value of a bachelor's degree anymore, depending on what it's in, whether or not that is as important today, or whether, someone at a high school potentially, just taking a bachelor's in theology at a seminary or a bachelor's, bachelor of divinity type degree, might, or even not fresh out of college, maybe somebody just never went to college. Like, why should you go to 4 years of university if you're a 35-year-old guy who wants to go into the ministry, just then to go through 3 to 4 more years of seminary, and your bachelor's degree is in what? I mean, what difference does that make? So I think that is one area where I think an exception could be provided for an extraordinary case. And I know there's several seminaries right now that are offering, either a Bachelor of Divinity or like a certificate program or something like that for those types of men. But it's where we are now, and I don't see any of that changing anytime in the future. But it's not like a biblical requirement or necessity that you have to have had a bachelor's degree before you can go into ministry. It's just the way we've kind of set that system up. So.
Yeah, we have had somebody that did not have any college education, but had been a pastor in a different denomination that didn't require that. And as he was becoming more reformed and decided to leave that, he has a lot of experience, but also needs to know some things about Reformed theology and polity. And so was pursuing a bachelor's in, I guess, divinity or theology. And there's a few places that offer that. I think Greenville, Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary, I've heard. So
RTS does a certificate.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't give you a degree, but you get it. Yeah.
It is interesting, the language between shall and then here's the exception to the shall. So the shall isn't quite a shall, but I guess it's shall except in that circumstance. I think it was Almquist that noted somewhere else that, of course, there's this three-fourths approval of the presbytery, that in the OPC, if there's some sort of extraordinary circumstance clause invoked, the General Assembly has to agree to it. So they take that pretty seriously, that it's not just like a extraordinary clause. You hear some presbyteries that every other exam is, let's just invoke the extraordinary clause. But by its very name, it probably shouldn't be something that you regularly do.
I've seen this used in our presbytery for a Baptist minister who was ordained for 15 years, became convinced of Reformed Presbyterian theology, took some more classes to beef up his education, and then so instead of him having to have the the theological requirements, especially, they'll grant him an extraordinary case ordination. The second part there that we read, talking about interns and licentiates previously. So some presbyteries do it one way and some do it another way, and there's probably some stuff in the middle where there's a set of licensure exams and then there's a set of ordination exams. And so if you've already been licensed, in some presbyteries you may have to take all of the ordination exams, even though some of them overlap. When I got ordained in Heritage Presbytery, they had 2 whole sets, so that my ordination exams, 3 of them were the same categories as my licensure exams, but they were a whole different set of questions aimed at sort of more higher tier pastoral ministry type things. But you are allowed to use your licensure exams, and if the presbytery deems it appropriate, to count towards your ordination trials. Most presbyteries, I think, are willing to do that.
Well, it's kind of an interesting feature of the language because, this has been amended a few different times. And part of the problem is that of the language of most of the following trials, where there are actually more... Well, when this section was originally put in the BCO, I had to do a lot of research for RPR because this came up. Sorry. But there were Bible content was not included, and then that was added, later by Ascension Presbytery, by the way. But anyway, it was added in, and I think even at one point there might have been another one that was added. But the idea originally was that all of those licensure trials, even though the language is different, so one is theology, the other is basic understanding of biblical doctrine. But by looking at the language of the BCO, as it was originally written before before Bible content was added, it was the intention of those men that basic understanding of biblical doctrine and theology are functionally equivalent. Assuming the presbytery wants to take it that way. They're not required to, but they're certainly not prohibited from doing that. And all of the licensure exam it was possible to take that for most of the following trials. That was before, obviously, again, Bible content was added in. So it's just it is an interesting feature that it's actually no longer most, because we've added 2, and so it doesn't fit. It's not more than half, unfortunately. So I'm going to be on a crusade one of these years to change that to many or some or something. I don't know. So.
It'll be a heated debate, I'm sure.
Yes, I'm sure.
A man, if he comes for licensure and now is coming for ordination, needs to, if he's studied more and has any changes on his views regarding the standards, he has to bring that up at this point as well.
Yeah, and it gives the presbytery the option to not re-examine him and just have him do, church history, sacraments, the extra things. But it doesn't require them. And I learned the hard way that it doesn't. If you go to a different presbytery, it doesn't mean that they're going to recognize the licensure exam of another presbytery. So I was licensed in one presbytery and then had to take all of the exams over again when I went to another one to be ordained.
I had the exact same experience, Jared. I think in the exact same presbytery. Yeah. But also, I love the idea that while the presbytery, or even let's say the examinations committee can make a recommendation, let's just approve his licensure. Anybody can say, no, I want to ask some more questions of this guy on theology, and they can do that. And it's not, it still protects that sort of minority of one that I want to ask more questions. I want to cover some things. So I think that's helpful.
The next section is going to show this, but just that comment, Steve, makes me realize how prepared a man really needs to be. Because he might be told by the committee, hey, we're going to do these exams, but he could get to the floor and anybody could stand up and say, hey, I want to talk about church history, or I want to talk about, let's talk about your Bible content that we didn't examine you in today, but I want to go back and, if he hasn't kept that up like he should, he could be in trouble. You have to be on your game. Let's do C and D. We've already kind of gotten into some of this, but we'll give a little more time to it. C starts to list the trials. Trials for ordination shall consist of, first, a careful examination as to the man's acquaintance with experiential religion, especially his personal character and family management, his knowledge of the Greek and Hebrew languages, Bible content, theology, the sacraments, church history, the history of the Presbyterian Church in America, and the principles and rules of the government and discipline of the church. A presbytery may accept a seminary degree, which includes study in the original languages, in lieu of an oral examination in the original languages. He shall prepare a thesis on some theological topic assigned by presbytery. The candidate shall prepare an exegesis on an assigned portion of Scripture requiring the use of original language or languages. He shall further be required to preach a sermon before the presbytery or committee thereof upon 3/4 vote. No presbytery shall omit any of these parts of trial for ordination except in extraordinary cases, and then only with 3/4 approval of presbytery. And D, whenever a presbytery shall omit any of these parts, it shall always make a record of the reasons for such omissions of the trial's parts omitted. So this is where if somebody's referring to ordination exams, this is the main section they're talking about. Written exams. In most cases, oral exams always, and some papers assigned. I mean, what stands out here? What's important for us to walk through this? I mean, my mind goes in 1,000 different directions. Perhaps one of y'all can kind of rein us in a little bit.
Something that can be helpful there is just if you have a committee that's going through this, which I think every single presbytery does, to have somebody in charge of a different area of examination. That way, something that isn't given short shrift. So like I'm on a committee and I have church history, and so I'm going to ask those questions. I'm going to grade that written exam. It takes a lot more off of the chairman, as if they have to be the only one to grade all of these things.
You have the church history part? I mean,
I do.
You don't even enjoy that. I can't imagine. Golly.
Well, I also think it's interesting how it begins. Well, I think it's interesting that Jared is grading church history exams too, but that it begins with that idea of sort of the inward experience, right? Practical experience in Christianity, and then to the areas of knowledge, with some kind of theoretical, with some practical, and then some sort of demonstration of that. I mean, so even like just the flow of it is very interesting to me. But also just my own experience with the examination in experiential religion, that this is, I mean, Ramsey describes this again as, the most important piece of this. And I think, in one sense we would agree with that philosophically, and yet we ask, 100 theology questions and very little in terms of, someone's Christian experience, experiential religion. Particularly, again, I know when I teach elders, when I go through elder training, it's always struck me, and I'm not the first person who's noticed this, but you think about the qualifications in Timothy and Titus, that there's one doctrinal qualification, and all of the rest of those are character qualifications. So certainly Paul is putting a much deeper emphasis on the character of the individual, because, you can teach somebody theology and Bible content, et cetera, and certainly you're going to grow in that. But character is something that, to a degree, exists or it doesn't, and is the most, in many ways, right? I mean, it is the most important marker of, if I could put it this way, sort of success in ministry. The last couple of years, we've seen so many guys leave the ministry because of character failures, and not nearly so many because of, they had bad ability to translate Greek and Hebrew. So it's just kind of an interesting, although we don't put a lot of importance on knowledge of Greek or Hebrew languages either. At least
that's interesting. Is I haven't been in a presbytery that has done a written. It all seems to be, if you took it in seminary, they accept that. Yeah. Although I've heard from OPC brothers that if you guys ever want to take a call in an OPC church, you need to brush up on your Greek and Hebrew, because they will give you a written exam on that. And so I think I do okay in my Greek, but my Hebrew needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
This I've become more familiar with this section than I've ever thought I would. I shouldn't say cared to, because I rather enjoy chairing our credentials committee at the moment. But we, just to give a few comments from my side of things, for anybody that may be interested in the future of becoming an ordained teaching elder or feels a call to ministry, write good papers in seminary, because we might receive them. In our case, we assign a theological topic to our candidates for a fresh paper, but we do allow them to give us an exegesis paper from seminary, and as long as it meets our requirements, we'll receive it. We reserve the right to assign a fresh topic or passage, but hold on to those papers. They can be very useful for you at this point. They sort of prove that Greek and Hebrew education you received. And then the sermon as well usually is doubled up from licensure. If you had to preach for licensure, and so if you have accomplished that, in our case, we never ask an ordinand to come and preach if he's already been licensed by our presbytery. So. Yeah. It's good to note here, if a presbytery leaves anything out or doesn't want to go through any of these, they've got to say why, and they have to tell us exactly what they left out. So that's a review and control issue to make sure that things are happening appropriately.
We didn't feel it was necessary to examine him in Bible content or theology.
Right. Yeah.
What? Yeah. I would also mention real quick, again, for those who are maybe in presbyteries, church history and history of the PCA are two separate exams. So even if one runs into the other, make sure your clerk is recording them separately, because they are two different exams.
We have one written exam that covers both, just because it's, But yeah, that's a good point. You do need to.
So know who the first moderator was. Know who Morton Smith is. Maybe Paul Settle. What those organizations were.
Yeah, 4 organizations. Yeah. So I can tell. I think I can tell this story safely here. We have time for a story, Ben.
Yeah, story and Polity Matters is a safe place for everyone.
Okay. Safe space. So when I was being ordained in Ascension, they were doing the church history exam at the end, and I actually really enjoyed my ordination exam. I know a lot of guys are like, I was enjoying it. It was a lot of fun, and I was answering questions left and right, and I didn't get them all right, but I was doing very well. We'll just put it that way. And then the last question, sorry, but that's part of the story. The last question was in PCA, and the guy who was asking the question said, "Okay, I have one final question for you. What gift did the RPCNA give to the PCA when it came in?" And like for a half second, I thought, it'd be really funny if I, make some sort of like, "Oh, sir, I have no idea." And then when he says, Covenant College and Seminary, I was going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I thought you asked which gift." And then immediately I said, "You stupid idiot, just get ordained. Like, it's not even funny. Just move on." But I was like, an eighth of a second away from saying the stupidest thing in my life. And let me be fair, I don't believe that's true. I was just like, I was just having so much fun answering questions, and people were laughing with me. I mean, I had people rolling in the aisles almost. This is Ascension during my ordination exam, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to ride this. And I thought, yeah, idiot, just get ordained.
Yeah,
and move on.
Careful with humor in the middle of the ordination exam.
Yeah,
Yes.
oh yeah. You can quickly turn on you, and especially considering I think half of that presbytery is former RPCNA, churches anyway. They might have looked for pitchforks and torches. So anyway,
well,
more than you wanted to know about me.
No, well, we had you on. We want to know about you. You talk so much more than Scott. It's just an adjustment for me and Jared. That's all. We love it. It's very different. I ran into a fan of the show. I hate to say it like that, but he described himself this way at RTS a couple weeks ago, and he made some reference to the fact that Scott doesn't talk very much, which I haven't told Scott yet, but he'll find out when he listens to this, or when he never listens to this, I suppose. I had said I was going to do E to the end by itself, but I think I'm going to do E on its own and give us a second to just chat, and then we'll do F through I all together. The next step is, in the examination of the candidate's personal character, the presbytery shall give specific attention to potential notorious concerns. Careful attention must be given to his practical struggle against sinful actions, as well as to persistent sinful desires. The candidate must give clear testimony of reliance upon his union with Christ and the benefits thereof by the Holy Spirit, depending on this work of grace to make progress over sin and to bear fruit. While imperfection will remain, when confessing sins and sinful temptations publicly, the candidate must exercise great care not to diminish the seriousness of those sins in the eyes of the congregation, as though they were matters of little consequence, but rather should testify to the work of the Holy Spirit and his progress in his holiness. The reason I wanted to stop and just have us give a couple comments here is because I feel like, especially in the last couple of years, I've noticed more and more men falling to sin, men who are ordained, who have given into temptation, especially sexual sin of various natures. And I just think it's important for us to sort of double down and emphasize the significance of a man's character and piety as he comes into the ministry. It does not just damage to a man and to his family, but when a pastor falls, it damages everybody connected to him. He loses his job, loses his family in some cases, and the church is damaged, sometimes even in ways that we couldn't imagine or couldn't predict, sometimes don't even see. So men, prepare yourself well, be close to the Lord and seek him. These other guys probably have better advice. They've been doing this longer than me.
Well, this came out of the revoice controversy, so that's in the background, even if it's not explicitly stated there. It's especially thinking about sexual sins. And that was a rather tense time, and there's a lot of debate over amending, because this is a newer section to 21. But I think at the end of that, we got something that was really well written here, and I think takes care of some of the concerns that Steve was pointing out, that we have tended to examine people and their theology and just assume that they have good character. And I think this is saying, hey, you need to pay attention to that. You definitely need to ask questions of character and make sure that the work of the Holy Spirit and sanctification is observable and happening in this guy's life.
Well, and I do think that in many ways, like the best place to do this is perhaps not on the floor of presbytery, but in a committee. This isn't, we're not a confessional, we're a confessional church, but presbytery is not a place of confession. We're not priests, let me put it that way. And it's not just like, sort of, I don't want to say virtue signaling, but I'll say it anyway, virtue signaling of, let me list 3 sins that I struggle with. I struggle with pride and working too hard, and I struggle, whatever it is, but rather for a committee to really talk to a man about these things. Obviously it works both ways, or it has to work both ways, that the committee and or presbytery has to be serious in asking questions, and the man has to be willing to be humble and open about his struggles. But I do think it's an important piece of that Christian experience, that we say more than, when I came to faith and when I received a call, I felt the call to ministry or in my experiences as a pastor, but that you have the capacity to talk about your struggle with sin and your fight against sin in a way that not just will translate necessarily to a committee, but how you speak about those things to your church in an appropriate way. But how you speak about those things is very important as a minister.
Well, here, let's finish out 21.4, starting back in F. While our Constitution does not require the candidate's affirmation of every statement and or proposition of doctrine in our confession of faith and catechisms, it is the right and responsibility of the presbytery to determine if the candidate is out of accord with any of the fundamentals of these doctrinal standards and, as a consequence, may not be able in good faith sincerely to receive and adopt the confession of faith and catechisms of this church as containing the system of doctrine taught in the Holy Scriptures. Therefore, in examining a candidate for ordination, the presbytery shall inquire not only into the candidate's knowledge and views in the areas specified above, but also shall require the candidate to state the specific instances in which he may differ with the confession of faith and catechisms in any of their statements and or propositions. The court may grant an exception to any difference of doctrine only if in the court's judgment the candidate's declared difference is not out of accord with any fundamental of our system of doctrine, because the difference is neither hostile to the system nor strikes at the vitals of religion. The presbytery, being fully satisfied of his qualifications for the sacred office, shall appoint a day for his ordination, which ought, if practicable, to be in the church of which he is to be the pastor. The extraordinary clauses should be limited to extraordinary circumstances of the church or proven extraordinary gifts of the man. Presbytery should exercise diligence and care in the use of these provisions in order that they not prevent the ordination of a candidate for whom they are truly exceptional circumstances, nor ordain, nor receive from other denominations, a person who is inadequately prepared for the ministry. Listeners, we're not trying to cruise through this without comment, but we have F and G dealing with stating differences and good faith subscription. We talked a little bit about that back in BCO 19, but I want to sort of tease for you. We have an interview coming up in just another couple episodes with Pastor David Strain from Jackson, Mississippi. He came on with us for a good hour to talk about good faith subscription. So any questions you may have about those differences and stating differences and how presbyteries handle it, hopefully those will get answered in just a couple more episodes. So we're really not going to say a whole lot. And then the H and I are more technical, just sort of telling us to move along and be aware of the extraordinary clauses. All that being said, is there anything we want to comment here, guys, on those last four parts of BCO 21.4?
No, RAO 16.3E6.
Yeah.
That's where it lists the how you might classify an exception. One is the candidate doesn't take an exception. The other is they take an exception, but you're like, it's not really an exception. That's when you would say it's semantic. The other is it really is a difference, but it doesn't strike at the vitals. And then the final being that it strikes at the vitals, and then you actually can't ordain them. But more on that in the other interview. But know that reference, be able to get there in the REO 16.3.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just quickly, I think it's interesting, that ruling elders are not required to state differences. Even though this references 24-6, question 2, which is a ruling elder question, nowhere in 24 does it require ruling elders to state their differences. But actually, I want to just say a quick thing about H. I thought that was interesting, that if practicable, you should do the ordination in the church of which he used to be the pastor, which obviously that makes sense, right? I mean, you do the ordination there. But one of the things that, again, sorry to bring up Ramsey again, but Ramsey had mentioned actually you should do the examination in the church where he is to be ordained, and that the church should be invited to sort of be there for both sides, right? Like if he totally blows it, you don't have to take our word for it. You were in the room, you saw it. Yeah. But also, if he does really well, or however he does, right, you get an opportunity to see your guy up there doing his thing, and all of that encouragement that brings. It was just kind of interesting. So, I don't know where else you would ordain a man if he's to be a pastor of than the church he is going to be in, but whatever.
As an AI audio generator would say, this podcast is over. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next time to finish up BCO 21. If you're interested in learning more about anything we discussed, check out the show notes in your podcast player or at politymatters.org. If you have questions or comments, you can contact us at politymattersfeedback@gmail.com. You can support our work directly by going to buymecoffee.com/politymatters. Your contributions help us keep production going from week to week. If you enjoyed the show, follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Polity Matters and subscribe in your podcast app of choice. Our thanks to Steve Tipton and our listeners for joining us. Until next time, y'all take care.